emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
What's today, my fine fellow?
Today? Why, it's Christmas Day.
That's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown.
Welcome to this special edition episode of the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast. I am Shinto, your jolly host, and in this episode I don't talk so much about the Jaguar or its games, but rather Atari and my history of Atari around Christmas. Think of it as a standalone storytime segment. I don't have any real history with Jaguar games around Christmas, but Atari in general, that's a whole other story. 4 stories, in fact. So I present to you here 4 tales of Atari Christmas past. I originally recorded this episode back in 2015, but I decided to re-record it for 2 reasons. First, the original version had several songs, Christmas songs, that bring me back to my childhood. Ones like Christmas Time Is Here from the Charlie Brown Christmas and the Chipmunk song, Christmas Don't Be Late. The problem is, I wanted to put my podcast on Spotify, and having music included like this violates their terms of service. It wasn't fair use, and that's always kind of bugged me, to be honest. The free music archive includes a few hundred Christmas tunes that I would be able to legally use in this episode. So what I did first was I took the existing episode but swapped out the music. I could have made it work, but that leads me to the second reason for re-recording this episode. Listening to my old recording, I sounded tired and dull, like I was half asleep. It's a short episode, so why not just re-record the whole thing? The stories are basically the same, but the presentation is slightly different, and the music is different. In the show notes, you'll find a list of all the artists and songs used throughout this episode. So enough of that, let's get started. I didn't know my Aunt Janet very well. She was my mom's sister, lived in a different state, and we seldom visited. So it was a big surprise to see this huge box from her addressed to both me and my brother under the Christmas tree in 1982. The box contained an Atari 2600, or rather, video computer system as it was known back then. A 4-switch wood grain system packed with joysticks, paddles, and the combat cartridge. This system must have cost around $150. That was the going rate for a Sears video arcade, at least going by the 1982 Sears Wish book, so I imagine this Atari-branded console cost about the same. Looking back, that was a huge deviation, a massive gift without precedent. Well, why would she choose to send this to us? To spend so much money on nephews she seldom saw? I don't know, never found out. She passed away about 10 years later, God rest her soul. The only exposure to video games prior to my dad hooking up our new Atari was playing Asteroids at a kiosk in Sears. I talk about this in more detail in the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast, episode 66. Other than that, the closest I've come to a video game was this light gun contraption that we received for Christmas a year or 2 prior. I haven't been able to find any pictures or accounts of this toy online, so I'll describe it here as best I can from memory. It was a blue sphere, basically, reminded me of the Death Star. The lower half was solid, and the upper half was largely open, but with 4 vertical struts holding up a small dome at the top. Under the dome, inside the top half of the sphere, was a projector with 2 lenses, one white and one red. The projector would spin around, casting a white light on the walls, and you, using a wired light gun, a pistol, would aim and shoot at the white light. If you hit it, it turned red and stopped moving for a second or 2. I think it started moving faster, counterclockwise, if I remember correctly, maybe up and down a little bit as well. It was a great toy at night, and my brother and I spent countless hours shooting at that moving white light. It made some sounds too. There was the mechanical sound of the projector moving, and also a sound when you scored a hit. As I said, I haven't been able to track down any information about this thing today, so if you know what toy I'm talking about, who made it, what it was called, I'd love to hear from you. Jaguar@GameByGamePodcast.com. Getting back to the Atari though, we had Combat, and although the console would accept other game cartridges, I was convinced that Combat was the only game we would ever need. Today I can see that I missed my original estimate by 187 Atari 2600 cards. In the 1983 movie A Christmas Story, the Red Ryder BB gun was the greatest gift Ralphie would ever receive. For me, it was that Atari VCS in 1982, which I still own. It started a lifelong obsession, which, that kind of sounds bad, but it's brought with it decades of great memories, endless fun, and it's a safe bet that I wouldn't be here recording this episode at all were it not for that unexpected, massive gift from my aunt in the Christmas of 1982. One decision by a relative I barely knew made this gigantic impact on my life, and I'm still talking about it decades later. The following year, which you might call 1983, my family was between houses, living in a rental home halfway down a cul-de-sac. There were just 2 bedrooms on the main floor, so my brother and I shared the basement, with our parents and little sister upstairs. We were only there for a few months, September through the end of February '84, but a few things about that house really stuck out in my memory. For example, there was this tree in the backyard that produced nothing but these little bitter apples. We threw a Halloween party that year. We got an ugly little dog, a stray. Awesome dog, she really was, but not much of a looker. My brother and I spent our afternoons and weekends playing with Hot Wheels and Star Wars toys, and hated to use the downstairs shower because of the centipedes that we would occasionally see scurrying around. We didn't know at the time that you could grab a magic stick and start blasting at them. That came later. But one of the biggest memories of that house was the Christmas of 1983. We had a Chipmunks Christmas record that we played over and over. Today I have a playlist of 129 Christmas songs, last I checked, but back then we had one record, Christmas with the Chipmunks. We'd set up the record player in the living room and just let it play, nonstop. So, 'twas the night before Christmas, and all through the rental house not a creature was stirring, except for my mom, who was staying up late playing Adventure. She wanted to try out the game before wrapping it up and sticking it under the tree, and found herself addicted. That duck game is what she calls it. My brother and I awoke the following morning to Santa's generous bounty of an Ewok Village playset and a Radio Shack Armatron, which was a robotic arm that you can control through the use of 2 little joysticks built into the base. Each one could move left, right, up, and down, and could twist left to right as well. Man, that Armatron, just switching it on caused it to make this electronic whirring sound. So you knew it meant business. For an embarrassingly long time, we played with it backwards, the arm dangling over the joysticks, which made it hard to both control and keep out of its way. That's how it was folded up in the box, so that's how we thought it was supposed to work. Eventually, though, we figured out that the arm could swing all the way around 180 degrees, and that worked out much better. But it was not the stuff from Santa, but rather the Atari games from my parents that really stand out. As I said, Adventure was under the tree that year. I guess my mom was eventually able to pull herself away from the duck game to wrap it up. We played that a lot on Christmas Day, mostly just level 1, but it was so new and fresh that we loved it. Yar's Revenge also got a fair bit of play that Christmas Day. Flag Capture, we played long enough to realize we'd rather play Adventure or Yar's Revenge. Sorry, Flag Capture. It's a good game concept, but really needs 2 players to make it work. 2 genuinely interested players, and the visuals might not be enough to captivate 2 kids at that time, and you've got to admit, up against Yar's Revenge and Adventure, it's a homely little game. I was finally able to get a few good games of Flag Capture with my son, and we did indeed have a lot of fun with it. It only took, 36 years? Better late than never. In all, we about doubled our collection of Atari games that one glorious morning. We also learned a valuable skill that year, and that's how to identify Atari games through their wrapping paper by their distinctive shape, weight, and balance. You know the typical way to figure out what's inside a wrapped box, you shake it, right? But you don't shake a potential Atari game to figure out what's inside, no, you squeeze it. Empty here, not empty here. Bingo. It was a skill that would serve us well in the future, but more about that in Christmas Tale number 3. The first Noel. Did you know that I can play the accordion? I got started thanks to my parents in a door-to-door accordion salesman, I kid you not. To this day, I still own a very nice blue Monarch brand accordion. The case actually has done a good job holding in that new accordion smell. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I was sitting in the family room in the mid-80s, probably 85 or 86, playing the first Noel on my accordion, and my dad, who was upstairs, complimented me on it. I think it was the only time I received a compliment from him on my mad accordion skills, but I did and still do put a lot of weight behind that. He, after all, comes from a family that, last I checked, watches the Molly B. Polka Party on RFD TV. Yes, that's a thing. My wife found a quote several years back. It defined a gentleman as someone who knows how to play the accordion but chooses not to. And my accordion has been safely tucked away for a long time. My wife has never heard me play it, so I guess that makes me a gentleman. But this isn't a podcast about accordions, much to your disappointment, I'm sure, so let's get back to the Atari. By this time, mid to late 80s, my brother and I became experts at identifying wrapped Christmas games. It wasn't as much of a skill as it was an art form. But when I got him an Atari 7800 game for Christmas that year, impossible mission was it, I decided to mix things up a bit to throw him off. I had a plastic case used for storing cassette tapes with a white lid and an unconvincing wood grain sticker across the top. It held about a dozen tapes in single file. So I bought this game, I took out the card and manual, and stuck them in the cassette tape case. The shape was entirely unlike an Atari game box, and though my brother recognized that it was my cassette tape case through the wrapping paper, he was still surprised when he opened it up, so I chalked that up to a win. A few years later, cassette tapes yielded to CDs, and our Atari 7800 had been shelved in favor of an Atari Lynx. I bought 2 Lynx games for him, Malibu Bikini Volleyball and Super Asteroids and Missile Command. I found these games loose at a used video game store. Since they didn't have a box or anything, I gutted a CD jewel case and stuck the game cards in there, taped down so they wouldn't rattle around. When wrapped, it looked and felt just like an audio CD, so he was definitely surprised to open that up and find a pair of Lynx games. I do sort of miss Atari games under the tree. In 2004, I half-jokingly asked my wife for an Atari game, any Atari game, as long as it was in the original box, and preferably in the original Atari style with a picture surrounded by a colored border. It didn't matter if the game itself was a duplicate, because it probably would have been, but I never saved the game boxes growing up, so an Atari box and game would still be cool, and finding an Atari-shaped present under the tree would have been awesomely nostalgic. I think. Maybe not in hindsight. But actually, what was better, my wife gave me a used Sega Dreamcast with a couple of games and controllers. It was thoughtful and unexpected. What a great console, and definitely a surprise. Leading up to the Christmas of 2014, my 9-year-old daughter told me that I was very hard to shop for, no doubt echoing something my wife had said. I replied that, nah, I'm not that hard. Anything with an Atari logo on it and I'm good. She made me a blizzard. She carefully cut out a dozen or so tissues into snowflake patterns and put them inside a tissue box. On the side of this tissue box was the Atari logo, drawn on paper and crayon and taped to the box. I think a lot of people who grew up Atari living in the vertical blank, as the Fulton brothers would say, I think these people, myself included, feel a sense of nostalgic reverence for the Atari logo. Well, when done properly, at least. The bell-bottomed Fuji from the Hasbro days, no. Replacing one of the letters A in Atari with a logo, no. But the logo over text format from the early days, or the left-aligned logo from the later days, those definitely. Maybe the standalone Fuji too. It kind of depends. There was a quote I once read on Atari Age. I don't remember who said it or when, but the quote was, "You'd buy a sack of gravel if it had an Atari logo on it." And for the longest time, that was true for me. It was all about the Fuji. In recent years, though, I've lost that a lot. I really have. Maybe it's the Game Band and Atari Box or Atari VCS fiascos. Maybe it's the current Atari brand holder suing t-shirt manufacturers and how that caused all of my Jaguar podcast store designs to be taken down, even though none of them contained the word Atari or the logo. Maybe it's, to be honest, overpriced kind of junky things that you find at Target stores from time to time. Maybe all of the above. The upshot is that the brand has kind of soured for me in recent years. And that's a sad thing. Probably not a happy story to close out on, but that's the way it is. That's what it's come to. Modern day Atari stuff has no interest to me. It's kind of been ruined. But what hasn't been ruined is everything old. Everything from the Jaguar on back. Old products, new developments for old products, it doesn't matter. I love them all. And being a big part of my childhood, a big part of my most memorable Christmases, I'll always have that. Nothing can be done today that'll take that away from me. Well, major head trauma, I suppose, but you know what I mean. The Atari of my past is still the Atari of my past, and I'll carry that with me to the end of my days. That's gonna do it for this special edition episode. I'll be back next time with actual Jaguar content. Thank you for tuning in, and from me and Bishop here and the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, and on behalf of my wife and children, I wish you and yours a very Merry Christmas, a belated Happy Hanukkah, a great Kwanzaa, a fantastic Festivus, a Wookiee full life day, and an electrifying refrigerator day. Oh yeah, Happy New Year too. Thank you for listening, for taking the time out of your day to download or stream an episode of my little podcast about an unloved video game console. It truly means a lot to me that you listen and hopefully even enjoy these episodes. One last thing, if you happen to get my obscure refrigerator day reference, well done you. Feel free to help yourself to an extra Christmas cookie. If not, well, links in the show notes. Either way, take care, and as you head through this holiday season, remember that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, so do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Merry Christmas. Oh, hi, Stoic. Yes. Hi, Stoic. It's good to see you. Why don't you go outside? Go outside. As my dog. His name is Stoic the Vast, after the village chieftain in How to Train Your Dragon. We were hoping he'd grow into the name, but nah, he's still a bit of a coward. Anyway, as long as you're still here, let me take a moment to thank and credit the musical artists whose work I've included in this episode. The first song is Sleigh Ride by D. Yankee. Next, I used A Christmas Adventure, Parts 1 and 2 by TRG Banks. The chiptune was the first Bleep Blop Noel by DMA-SC, done on an Atari ST, as luck would have it. The lovely rendition of Silent Night was by Dexter Britton. And finally, the acoustic guitar song you're listening to right now is We Three Kings by Ben DeVries. You'll find links to all of these songs in the show notes. So thank you to these artists and the Free Music Archive in general for making these tracks available on a Creative Commons license.
Edit.
Good news, everyone! I was able to identify the light gun toy that I was talking about in the first story. I started flipping through old Sears wish books on wishbookweb.com, and I found it in a Simpson Sears Christmas catalog from Canada in 1979. The thing is called the Laser Light Star, where laser is spelled with a Z because it looks cooler. You'll find a picture and description of this thing in the show notes for this episode. This is a real needle in a haystack sort of scenario, so being able to find this toy it's a bit of a Christmas miracle.